All right, so we have our content pieces today, and Todd and I are both, we want to let you know, we're just going over tiny pieces. I know that many of your teachers probably spent a lot of time on the World Wars. We can't do them in 5 minutes, but we just want to give you a quick refresher, particularly some of the things that are specific to what you're seeing on this slide in our course and exam description, and some of the must-knows that we talk about being in those blue boxes. We want to just cover a few of those. So if you want to move on to the next slide, we'll just kind of talk about, this is something that I do in my class. There are many different versions of this, acronyms in order to sort of remember causation for World War I, and I use MANIA with my students. And so MANIA stands for, the M is for militarism, the A is for alliances, the N is for nationalism, the I is for imperialism, which we're going to get into a little bit today with your homework. And then that last A is sort of the moment that this begins, the assassination of the Archduke, the heir to the Austrian throne. So I know my students really like these sort of to remember things and keep them straight. And causation is certainly an important part when we're doing any kind of conflict. So we're just going to quickly touch a little bit more depth about these different pieces. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about military technology from World War I. But of course, we're not really getting into the entirety of the conflict. And I hope that your teacher had an opportunity this year to go into a lot of depth with you. So militarism, we have this idea of technology. The Industrial Revolution has happened. It hit the second Industrial Revolution. We've had this definitely a huge effect on the means of war making in terms of weapons. And we're going to talk about those a little bit at the end here. We have military values. There's strongly patriotic national presses and notions that war is manly and heroic, right? These are very well cultivated values. Countries will begin to have standing armies, and these standing armies are trained and they're ready to fight. So this is an ideology that we're going to definitely see is going to cause World War I. We also have policy making. We have secular leaders that rely on generals and military experts to help shape public policy. So militarism, the M in our little MANIA acronym. Okay, there's a whole lot of stuff going on this slide that we're going to go through pretty quickly. There's a variety of alliances, friendships that are in place that bring other countries into this conflict and take this conflict from being a localized issue into a global issue. So these alliances that are developed between 1870 and 1914 created two sides bound by commitments to protect sovereignty or to intervene militarily, depending on what we had. We had the Three Emperors League, which was an agreement between Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Russia backs out of that in 1878. We have the Dual Alliance and the Triple Alliance. The Dual Alliance is a promise between Germany and Austria-Hungary to aid each other if Russia, if they're going to war, or if Russia assists a nation which either country was already at war with. We have the Triple Alliance, which is between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, of course, super important. We have the Entente Cordiale, which is an agreement between Britain and France that resolves colonial disputes and promises diplomatic support. We have the Triple Entente, which was an alliance between France, Russia, and Great Britain. And then Russia is going to support Serbia if attacked by Austria-Hungary. So all of these entangled friendships are going to be important as we move towards war. And it's going to drag in all of these other countries. All right, imperialism, we're definitely focusing on that today. You know, we did our piece on imperialism yesterday, where your homework is going to deal with imperialism. And so you see this map there, but imperialism is going to lead to conflict. And some of you that brought that up in the homework that was due today did a really nice job. So conflicts over imperial issues are not an immediate cause of World War I, but it creates this tension and it provokes some countries to seek out and strengthen their alliances. And countries, as that answer in the short answer said, they want new markets and they want the prestige of these global empires. So definitely we're going to see the I in imperialism is going to be part of this. We also have the Moroccan crises in 1905 and 1911. And in 1905, Germany fears this alliance between Britain and France. It supports Morocco in order to provoke France and drive a wedge between these two countries. We're definitely foreshadowing what's going to happen in 1914 with that alliance between Britain and France. So we have imperialism as one of these tensions that's going to cause World War I. Our next letter.
I've clicked it. It's lagging.
No problem.
There we go.
I don't see it. All right, nationalism. It's like the beauty of being live. So my students always say this is my favorite word in AP Euro because there's nationalism is just ever present in the second half of the course. We have this sense of national identity, unifying characteristics, things like customs and language and religion and traditions. And these are things that don't necessarily fit in borders of a map, that they are, I call them sometimes in my class, sort of the glue that keeps people together. We have a sense of national belonging, voting rights, social welfare, the military draft, all of these things that contribute to that. Oh, and we have ideologies. And those ideologies, that glue that kind of helps keep people together, is also exclusive often of other people. So we exclude others. We have race and social Darwinism. These ideologies are going to become really more prominent. And we have this kind of us versus them mentality that believes that we are nationally superior and that the other groups, that leads to the denigration of other groups. So this sort of nationalistic glue keeping people together, but also keeping other people out. I am not going to read through this timeline for you, but I do want you to see how quickly we go from the assassination of the Archduke to full-blown war with all of these other pieces being pulled in. So if you want to have a look at this, you can pause the video, look through this timeline, but I don't need to read it to you because we want to get to that outline of the DBQ, and we have other pieces to do here. So very quickly, we're going to go through some of the new military technology. My students usually really like this, that comes out of World War I. So you can see on the right here, we have a picture of the Battle of Verdun, and we have the barbed wire that they're crawling through. We have planes that are used in World War I, first initially more for observation and reconnaissance, and then later on they are armed with guns. Tanks are used by both sides because they can crush through that barbed wire that you're seeing in the picture, and they could cross over the trenches. We have the implementation of poisonous gases like chlorine and mustard gas. And even though this resulted in a very small number of deaths, it was a psychologically devastating part of the war. Machine guns are widely used by both sides during World War I because they're portable and they're powerful. And we've got flamethrowers. I have some great pictures that I show my students of flamethrowers that they just can't believe that these are real, and they're first used near Verdun. And the U-boats, the submarines, and sort of that iconic German weapon, and it sinks ships throughout the war. And our last piece before we move on to World War II, as we're talking sort of about the conditions that are happening, is trench warfare. And there's a picture there on the right of German machine guns in a trench. And we see this mostly, we see this along the Western Front, these long, narrow trenches that are dug into the ground. They're designed to protect troops from machine gun fire and also from the artillery attacks from the air. These were trenches that faced each other, these opposing trenches. And in the middle was this no man's land. It was an area that was dangerously unprotected, filled with mines and barbed wire. So this middle center is no man's land. And the trenches were very horrific. Conditions were inhumane. The trenches were exposed to the elements. People died from the exposure. They died from being infested with rats and lice. And their cost of lives was staggering. And they often resulted in that word you're seeing bolded at the end, a stalemate. So the trench warfare really prolonged this conflict. No side is able to make an advance. All right, World War II. Todd, you're up.
Hey, good job. Sorry for the laggy internet, but we're going to talk about World War II, explain how technology and innovation affected the course. Yes, that's a learning objective, but it's really going to be a broad spectrum overview of what happened in World War II. And we'll begin with this image on the right. And the war begins with the German invasion of Poland in September. Well, it is in September of 1939. And so you see this makeshift bridge that the Germans have built as they're crossing the river into Poland. This is how the war begins. You can see this other bridge has already been destroyed, it looks like, and then they've made a makeshift bridge. So it isn't clear to me because of the image if the bridge was destroyed by the Polish or if it was destroyed by the Germans, but they've had a makeshift bridge. They've had a float bridge, they call it. So new military technology will be important in World War II as it was in World War I, and will make industrialized warfare and unfortunately genocide possible. New weapons such as planks, tanks, and trucks, better weapons, I guess, allowed Germany's Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war, to bring the Axis powers early victories. An example of this is the Polish campaign of 1939. Hitler's armies conquered Poland in only 4 weeks. And by spring of 1940, Germany had occupied Denmark, Norway, and Holland. And soon after that, France falls as well. Hitler began to bomb British airfields and factories. And in September of 1940, so we've just been 1 year, he began the indiscriminate bombing of civilian targets as well. By June of 41, Hitler broke the pact with Stalin. There had been a Russian and German agreement, a non-aggression pact. And they then go into the Soviet Union. Germany conquers Ukraine and was poised to take Leningrad and Moscow when a severe winter forced a German retreat. Here you see an image of, oh my gosh, we're going the wrong way. An image of the Germans entering Paris, and you can see the Arc de Triomphe in the background there as they're coming into the city. Pretty much no one's meeting them. It's I can't remember the word. They're not faced with any hostility. Hitler's new order was based firmly on the Nazi guiding principle of racial imperialism. Occupied peoples were subject to harsh policies dedicated to ethnic cleansing and the plunder of resources for the Nazi war effort. Germany then is going to divide France into 2 parts. The German occupied the north. The southeast remained nominally independent under the aging Marshal Pétain, who formed the Vichy regime, the French Vichy regime, which adopted many of the aspects of Nazis' National Socialist ideology. And then these administrators, while they're in France, will steal goods and money from local Jews. They will set the currency exchanges at very favorable rates for Germans, while soldiers were encouraged to steal and to purchase goods at cheap exchange rates and send them home. So a flood of plunder reached Germany and helped to maintain high living standards, preserve morale at home, but that's certainly not what was going on in the occupied areas. We're going to also touch on the Holocaust. The learning objective is how and why cultural and national identities are affected by war because of the rise of these powers, with one of those effects being the Holocaust. And so you see this image. It's the arrival of Hungarian Jews at Auschwitz and German-occupied Poland in June of 1944. They are identified, you see, with that Jewish Star of David on pinned to their coats. And this image is almost, I think, all women and children. You don't see any men in this particular image. The ultimate abomination of Nazi racism progressed from the condemnation of all European Jews, is where they began, and of other peoples considered racially inferior. This would include disabled peoples, people with Down syndrome, to extreme racial persecution, and then to annihilation in the Holocaust. 1941, Hitler and Nazi leadership ordered the SS, this is the secret police, to implement the final solution of the Jewish question, which meant the mass murder of all Jews in Europe. The Germans established an extensive network of concentration camps, industrial complexes, and railroad transport lines to imprison and murder Jews and other so-called undesirables, and to exploit their labor from them before they died. And the surviving residents of the ghettos were loaded into trains and taken to camps such as Auschwitz, where over 1 million people, most of them Jews, were murdered in gas chambers. Jews in Germany and occupied Western and Central Europe will follow into that same fate, unfortunately. We'll continue with the war. With almost unchallenged air superiority, the US and Britain will mount massive bombing raids on German cities to maim industrial production and break civilian morale. The campaign of 1942, the German campaign against the Soviet Union, turned disastrous at the Battle of Stalingrad, and the Soviets will surround and systematically take out the German Sixth Army after it had looked like the Germans had it won. Come on, laggy. Here we go. Stalingrad presents the bloodiest battle in the history of warfare. 1.8 up to 2 million killed. It's still uncertain, wounded or captured. Hitler, who had refused to allow a retreat, they suffer a catastrophic defeat for the first time. And so this is 1942, and they'd been at it since 39. German public opinion then turns decisively against the war. And then June 6th, D-Day as it's known, 1944, British and American forces landed on the beaches at Normandy, France, breaking through the German lines. By the spring of 1945, the Allies had reached Germany, forced the Germans out of Italy, so liberating Italy, and they had captured Mussolini. And so one of the things that we do with my students when we have a trip to go to any of these places, we want to make sure we visit these different grave sites. Just to finish out the slide, the Soviets advanced into Poland, then into Romania, Yugoslavia, and Hungary. They also entered Berlin, April 1945. And so in your head, you can see the Soviets coming from right to left on the map, taking over into Germany, with the Allies, Britain and the United States, coming through France from left to right. Hitler then is in Berlin and commits suicide on April 30th, 1945. And then on May 7th, the German commanders will surrender, and that is VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, ending the war in Europe.